Welcome to the Owner's Box. I'm excited about this show. We have a guy who calls himself a rebel, then almost became a lawyer, and then he ended up being a maverick in the skilled nursing world. His story is really exciting, and there are so many learn-froms. Before we introduce our guest, as always, Don Piero from the Empower Lab. Hey, Don.
Thank you, David. I, too, am excited. Don is going to be an exciting episode today. I've had the pleasure of getting to work with him over the last few years and can't wait to hear him share his story.
And without further ado, Don, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me. It's my pleasure. Hopefully this does some good for somebody else. They can learn from my failures and my successes.
Well, we opened the show with the coined phrase rebel. And that was something that you had said to me, and I want to hear a little bit about being a rebel.
I don't know when it started, but from an early age, I was at odds with my father. I was a really smart kid in school, but decided that at the end of high school, I got asked to leave in the middle of my senior year and went to work, drifted from job to job, became a truck driver, and sometime in my early 30s, decided that I had had enough, went back to school and eventually to law school, and somehow ended up in the skilled nursing business.
Now, you said, I think, during that rebel period, you had a few jobs. How many jobs was that?
32. And the last one has lasted 22 years.
Nothing against millennials, but 32 jobs would be fairly normal in today's world. But this is a few years ago.
Yeah, this is a while back.
So tell us about law school, almost became a lawyer. How did that end up being an almost?
Well, when I went back to college, I was working at a company full-time and did my undergrad at night and on the weekends. When I finished undergrad, went to law school full-time from the age of 37 till just about 40. And had visions of becoming, a high-priced lawyer, making lots of money, and discovered when I got out of school that there were just no law jobs to be had. It was 1995. The economy was in the dumper. And so I looked around for other opportunities that I could create for myself. Ended up starting a purchasing network for nursing homes. And that was through an old family relationship. My father and this other guy's father had been in the nursing home business, and this other guy had gone into the nursing home business himself. So we started this thing and ran that for a few years and discovered there was never going to be a payday for me. So another opportunity came along, and I ended up buying my first facility out of bankruptcy in 1999.
This is really interesting. We've shared in previous podcasts how our fathers have affected us one way or the other, and I relate to your story. My father was in aerospace and got laid off after 15 years in the space program. And for whatever reason, he bought a restaurant. And interestingly enough, when it came time for me to branch out to my first business, I bought a restaurant out of bankruptcy. And what really motivated me was it worked for my dad. Surely it'll work for me. Not that I was right.
Right. It's kind of, I always tell people it's what you learn around the dinner table that's going to be most familiar to you, what's, most bankable in terms of your network of people that you just kind of know. And you can reach out to them for advice, help for capital sourcing, things like that.
I had a similar relationship with my dad. He was in the liquor business for 40 years, and it didn't help me in business at all, except to be able to choose a good wine on the wine list when it came to restaurant time.
So the group purchasing business, how did that go, and what happened next?
So we started this company for independently owned nursing homes to get some leverage in the purchasing arena and to develop common quality improvement tools. So it really was for the independent owners to pay dues. And so they paid dues, but there was never going to be an opportunity to either turn around and sell that or have it become a real profit-making venture because it operated more as a co-op. It got me real familiar with the business, however, and I formed what I thought were some pretty nice relationships with the people that were members of this co-op, one of which, after I had left, one of those members of that co-op called me up and said, "Hey, there's a facility in bankruptcy. Would you like to go after it?" And I said, yes.
Tell us more about that.
So did some due diligence on it. The facility went into bankruptcy because Medicare claimed that the facility charged Medicare too much. So those were overpayment claims. And then the IRS was after the operator for back taxes. So we went into the bankruptcy court and sat down with the U.S. attorney and said, tell you what, we'll make payments to IRS and to Medicare for a period of years at a very discounted interest rate. And that was the way we financed the purchase of the business operations. The landlords of that property had not been paid rent in a year and a half. And they just literally handed us the keys and said, take over the loan payments and you can have the building. So
Wow.
we ended up with that. So net buy-in for that was $2.5 million. And I believe after 7 years, we refinanced it for $13 million.
So $2.5 million all financed.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I never would have imagined myself going into a court and even asking the IRS or Medicare to back me. How did you come up with that idea?
Well, more than anything, they just want their money. So if you offer them a solution to their request or desire, and you fulfill their need, and you're a reasonably reputable person, the worst they could do was say no, right?
You know, what's interesting about this part of the story is the company was in bankruptcy, which I'm assuming was a Chapter 11 or a 13, probably 13. And all the other creditors are gone and got nothing because of that. But the IRS still has claim and gets its money no matter what.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about that is even though we had this settlement with the IRS and Medicare, we would still, for probably 6 or 8 years after the closing, we would still get letters from the IRS saying, hey, you owe us X amount of dollars. And it was, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we would have to reach back out to this U.S. attorney and say, hey, got to fix this. And she was very helpful and always did it. It was a little bit difficult, but, we always made our payments on time. And I think we even paid them off early. So
you got into the business with no cash up front.
That's correct.
That's incredible. I mean, how do you operate without the cash?
So I had a partner in the deal, and he already had one nursing home and had a banking relationship and established a line of credit for us. I didn't have anything.
So he put up his house as sort of collateral for a line of credit, or he was just sophisticated enough to have that level of relationship with the bank?
Yeah, signature capability at the bank.
Yeah. And I think back then banking was a little different than it is today. They seem to be a little bit more regulated and a little tighter. Mm-hmm. But that's great. So how was that partnership?
That partnership started on December 1st and it ended on March 17th.
Of the same year?
Well, 12/1 to 3/17. So it's 3.5 months.
That's a long relationship.
Well, funny thing is we had known each other for 3 or 4 years. We were friends, talked on the phone all the time. And he thought that his son should run the business for his first job. And I just said, my name's on the line for this. And I said, I just can't see that happening. So we kind of had a Cold War for a little while. And I ended up calling him one day and just said, this doesn't work for me. We have to do something. So I said, you can make me an offer and I'll either accept your offer or I'll buy you out for that same number. So he sent me a letter with a number, and I said, okay, I'll buy you out.
Wow. What's occurring to me immediately when I hear this story is you were obviously in a partnership that wasn't good, and you dealt with it very quickly. I mean, that was a 4-month period. I think for the listening audience, if you are in a bad relationship in business, the smart thing to do is get out as quickly as you can. And that strategy used really worked fantastic. I mean, worst case scenario is he buys you out and you're good, and he gave you a number that really made sense. So fantastic deal. Then what happens?
So at the time that we were making the split, I reached out to this guy's name was Jerry, or still is Jerry. And I said, hey, let's do this together. I'm going to buy your boss out. And so we talked, and we agreed that he'd get 50% of everything, real estate, business operations. And I said, deal.
So did he put up any capital at this time?
Yeah, he put up, I can't remember how much it was. It wasn't much, maybe 20 grand or something.
So you're only in the business about 4 months, and you get an offer from your partner, and then you exercise your option to buy him out. How did you make that happen? Because you still didn't have any real capital.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough. My dad was in the nursing home business, and he and I went up and looked at this thing one day, and his assessment was this could be a really good deal. So he helped me get a credit line and had to sign my life away for that to him. Anyway, so we had the credit capability, and we paid that credit line off within the first year, and then went to another bank and got our own credit facility. And so my dad was completely taken out of it.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's incredible that he was able to do that with you and take some risk with you, I guess.
You know, this is a lot of big decisions in a pretty short period of time. And the one I'd really like to drill down on is you have a 10% partner and you make a decision to bump him up to 50%. That's a big leap. Share with us what was going through your mind when you made that decision and how you feel about it today.
So I feel as good about that decision today as I did the day that I made it. Interesting part of that story is, when my dad was thinking about helping me get in, he and I drove up there one day and looked at the facility, and we met with Jerry. And, he was talking to Jerry, and he said, "What do you think, Jerry?" And Jerry said, "Well, I don't know what to do, and I haven't got my dad to talk to because he's away on a hunting trip. He's out in the middle of the woods, and I can't get to him." But he said, "I don't know, Mr. Gorman, what do you think?" And my dad said, "Well, if you don't take this opportunity, you're going to look in the mirror in 5 years and go, oh my gosh, what a major blow it." So anyway, he decided to join me, and here we are.
Well, then I think your dad had a comment for you too, didn't he?
Well, yeah, he said to Jerry, he said, "I think my son's a fool for giving you 50%, but that's his problem." Anyway, it's been a great partnership. We've had, like any marriage, we've gone to marriage counseling occasionally, just a couple times, a few times in the early years. And we were fortunate enough to get a really smart guy who would interview each of us and then interview us together. And at the end of the meeting, he would say, if you guys could just leave your egos at the door and work with each other's talents, you guys are going to make a lot of money. He said, because you're so perfect for one another. Jerry's the guy that is so good at what's right in front of him, and I'm the guy that sees a long ways down the road. And, somehow we complement one another.
Nice.
Well, it goes back to that book Don and I love, and we've talked about before, called Rocket Fuel. So listening audience, look at Rocket Fuel, which the premise is that to have Rocket Fuel, you've got a visionary, which sounds like you are, Don, and then you've got an integrator, which was Jerry. And when you put those two together and it works, it's Rocket Fuel. So that's exciting.
We've been pretty blessed.
So let's see. Let's talk about, probably hasn't all been sunshine and roses. You've shared a couple of high points and even some quick low points that you got through in 4 short months. Talk to us about a couple more of those high points and even a couple of the low ones or the big challenges you've faced over the last 20 years.
So in 2006, we had in 2004, an opportunity came up to purchase the real estate of another nursing home. And for 2 years, I looked for financing to get the deal done. And so ended up taking a 17% mezzanine loan for $4 million. And everybody I know other than Jerry said we were nuts to do it. So we bought the real estate, ended up refinancing. And this was right around the period that we refinanced our first facility that we'd bought out of bankruptcy. So we refinanced the first facility and ultimately paid off the $4 million and then assumed a loan that the original real estate owner had on this second building. And then at some point, we refinanced that whole thing for a lot more money and took some cash out of there as well. So that was a high risk, and I would call it probably reasonable reward, but we're still pretty happy with what we did there.
So it sounds like you could share with our listening audience your philosophy on leverage and how it's played out for you and how you feel about that today, even maybe.
If you step away from the day-to-day stuff that's going on all the time and look at who you really are at the time, So when we took on our first facility, neither of us really had anything. I mean, we had a little money, but, nothing to speak of. And then when the second facility came available, we were making a lot of money, but we had zero cash invested. So we really didn't have a lot to lose at that point. So taking the risk wasn't as frightening as it could have been had we been personally guaranteeing something with all of this stuff behind us, right? So looking at that risk I tried to remove myself from the whole situation and look at it with neutral eyes. And that's where I landed with that decision. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So given today's world, if you were doing it all over again, would you have drawn that kind of money out of that real estate at 17%? Does that still work in today's market?
So if we could cast the pandemic aside and all of the government strategies that, in quotes, helped us along, I would say yes. I mean, because at the time, remember, the driving rationale is, what do you have to lose? I didn't have that much to lose at the time.
Sure.
So if I were in the same situation, absolutely.
Don and I were talking about this last night. We've met a lot of entrepreneurs through this journey, and we find that they fall on different sides of the scale. There are entrepreneurs who are absolutely risk averse. They don't believe in debt, and they want to grow their companies, and some of them have been very successful growing their companies. And then there are guys who are, caution to the wind. I mean, they go for it. And then you find everything in between. My feeling is that there's a healthy amount of debt and a calculated amount of risk. And if you're making thoughtful, strategic decisions, which I think is what you were doing in this case, I mean, that had to be a burgeoning industry. People were aging and living longer, and that marketplace must be and still is, growing. So I think that when you have a healthy relationship with debt, that's how you can grow a business very successfully.
So to kind of paraphrase what you just said, debt's been our best friend. We've made a lot of money with debt. And, it's debt financed. So debt's always good if you've got solid business operations. So when we, later in our story, we decided to build a new skilled nursing facility. We were the first ones in 20 years to have built one in California, just because the reimbursement structure was not amenable to that. So we, went to our bank, and this bank that we use has an entire division that just does nursing home financing. And they financed the purchase or the construction for us. And then we later refinanced it with a HUD-insured loan at, ridiculously low rates and fixed for 40 years. So
Brilliant.
So I'm kind of curious to ask you both. This goes back to your visionary concept, David, that you mentioned earlier. I know a few times when I hung it out there, I had a couple of my friends say, "What, are you crazy?" And I remember thinking to myself, "What are you talking about?" I had a vision for how it was going to work out. I really didn't even feel like I was taking a risk, even though I guess in hindsight, looking back at it, I was kind of hanging it out there. How was that for either one of you?
Well, I mean, I think that your question is really a statement. If you are committed and you believe in yourself and you're being strategic, then it's really not as high of a risk as the outsider might think. I mean, it really comes down to, are you committed and are you willing to do what it takes? I mean, Don got into his first business with no money down almost. I mean, what was the risk? The risk was that it was already in bankruptcy. I mean, he had nothing to lose. I love that. I wish I could find a business in bankruptcy right now I could do that deal on.
So all of these commenters about the risk that you're taking, and there were commenters about my partnership with Jerry, there were commenters about all kinds of stuff. They never take the time to step outside of their own shoes and stand in yours before critiquing what you're doing. So it was easy. Once you figure out that, they can't step out of their own shoes, it's very easy to, I'm going to use the word dismiss their comments, but it's more like understand that they don't really have an empathetic view of where you are.
And it's probably safe for us to say that although Don's already confessed being a rebel, I think there's a little bit of rebel that lives in all of us. And that rebel is the one that says, you don't get it.
Right.
I'm going for it.
Yeah. I think guys like us play to win rather than playing not to lose. And that's the difference when it comes down to how you look at that.
I agree.
Yeah, cool. So let's see, take us forward. I think you built up this chain. You've got you get 4 facilities, real estate of a couple of them. I think hit a little hitch in your biggest facility somewhere in the, 2015, 16 timeframe?
Somewhere in there, I try to erase that year from my mind. So we had a patient come in and died of Legionella. And so when that happens, you notify the health department, and their first call is to the local television station and the local newspaper. And so they close us down for admissions. They have us haul all of our water in, freshly supplied water. We have to stop using and all of the water sources that are piped into our building because we had to find out where the Legionella was located. So we went through extensive testing. All of our patients had to have sponge baths with trucked in water. And so the autopsy on the patient showed that the Legionella from which this patient died of was not the same that was found in our building. There was one shower head that had a Legionella positive sample out of all 180 shower heads in the building, and faucets and toilets and all that stuff. I mean, they just test everything. But by then, the damage had been done.
And the damage is not just horrible media, but a huge financial slam, right? With the cutting off your ability to take patients.
Yeah, the losses were, the hard calculable losses were in excess of $2 million, but it was far greater than that. I mean, there was reputation loss. There was, and when reputation loss occurs, employees don't want to come to work for you. There's an entire ripple effect that nobody really contemplates.
Yeah, I think the intangible is your reputation in that business is everything. I mean, you're going to put your loved one in a secure place. You want to know it's going to be secure. I can imagine how devastating that would be.
Yeah.
And how did you rebound?
So, slow rebuild. It took us years to recover. We were at the point of starting to make money at the start of right when the pandemic started. And, government freaked out and said, everybody stop everything. We had broken even the month prior, and everything was pointing that we were going to profitability the following month. And so then they shut off admissions, and, everybody started freaking out. Wages started climbing, and, it just went backwards from there.
Yeah, I think the COVID-19 started in a nursing home in Seattle. And so I'm sure that gave a bad reputation to all nursing homes after that, huh?
Right.
Yeah, devastating.
Well, Don, just before COVID was when we started working together. And I remember that, as we started to approach that break-even point, what we were really affecting was aligning and coordinating your team, as well as you and Jerry at hopefully what had been higher levels than through that Legionella crisis. And I'm wondering, hindsight being 2020, had we not done that work, how would the COVID period have been different, do you think, or would it have been the same?
That's one of those pure speculation answers, right? I'm not sure I know. I think that what we gained was a very intimate level of discussion between our leaders. I think that absent that, it would have been, like the proverbial fire drill, right? Everybody running in all kinds of different directions. Instead, we had a leadership team of somewhere between 4 and 5 people, plus Jerry and me, and they were able to prop each other up. They were working 7 days a week, 15, 16 hours a day, and, it was just like nonstop. And, these people are sending emails at 7 in the morning and 11:30 at night, So it built a cohesive unit.
Yeah, I think, we set up a cadence of meetings and a system of communication that had them ready for that crazy, swirling series of this and that and this and that happening that might have gotten lost in communication gaps had we not set that up.
Yeah, it really deterred finger pointing, which was really important. It was a time for the team to really gel and work together. And if one failed, we all failed. And that's kind of the attitude that we tried to take with every one of those failures. And there were failures. There were some great positive moments, but overall, we have somehow muddled through.
You've muddled through, and you've kind of now moved to a shift of strategy. Kind of bring us up to date. What's next? Where are you going now?
So we're on 2 of our facilities, we're changing the programming there. So normally we would be taking elderly patients. Our specialty is short-term post-acute recovery. So post-surgery, post-stroke, they'd come to us for, average length of stay was maybe 10 days. And then we had some long-term care patients as well. So we're moving some of the buildings into behavioral health, which is an entirely different model. And on the 2 buildings that we're moving into behavioral health, we have a tenant. We're going to lease the buildings to this new tenant. And we're pretty excited on that and pretty far down the ramp on that.
So it sounds like a shift from operator to landlord on those two facilities?
Yeah.
Great.
So you go through 2 major crises, and it sounds like the team is battle-hardened as a result. But a lot of entrepreneurs have gone through some really tough times, especially through this pandemic. And I would like to hear some of what your personal strategies were, because it must have been enormously stressful. There must have been a lot of anxiety around, those two events. Can you share with us some of your personal strategies?
So how did I deal with it? Is that what you're
how
asking?
did you deal with it? I mean, you got a full head of hair.
Well, 2 things. Number one, I've always been blessed with this capability. I don't know if it's capability or whatever, but a trait where I can just, in my mind, stick something in a box and put it on a shelf and not let it sit on my shoulder with a small sledgehammer and beat me on the head. So I was able to set these difficult times into one of those boxes. And, I had to bring them out occasionally, but, regardless of what was happening in the outside world, we still had a business to run. And our business was intimately tied to that pandemic. So a lot of our meetings, much of the theme was, well, because of COVID and because of COVID and because of COVID. And finally I said, you guys got to get over this stuff. I mean, we all do. And I was just guilty as everybody else. I was saying the same thing. And at some point I said, we got to stop because COVID doesn't matter anymore. We still take care of elderly people. Their families are still concerned. We hadn't let visitors into our buildings for a year and a half. And, in our facilities, visiting is a big part of everyday life for the elderly. So understanding that the pandemic was just part of our reality and being able to not let outside influences of the pandemic and the government's mandates that they would change every day affect how I approached my business model.
Well, I hear what you're saying. You have, I think, an innate ability to compartmentalize. And that's, how you were able to stay focused on the prize. I don't have that skill. And I tend to be my own whipping stick. And when things are tough, it's always my fault. And I'm always no one beats me up better than myself. And so I have to remind myself of that no one can beat me up as much as myself. And so that's a learn for me right now, which is, when things are hitting the fan, is compartmentalize it, put it on the shelf so that you can be there present for your family and those other things that are important. Thank you.
So one other point, I've been, how long ago? 14 years ago, I learned to do transcendental meditation, that's a pretty glorious phrase for something that's ultimately simple. Sit for 20 minutes at a time and just close your eyes and try to empty your mind. It's very calming. It also allows you, when you wake back up, it's like you know what's important, what's not, what you should be driving for. And so that practice has worked wonders for me.
Yeah, good for you. I have experience with meditation as well. And my challenge is consistency.
Yeah, me too.
Is doing it, because that's how it really provides value, is that consistency of having that spot in your day where you spend that I mean, my goal when I first started meditation was I'm going to do 30 seconds. That's all I want. And, I've built up to 20 minutes. And then, you get involved in life and you stop doing it. And then you got to go back to the beginning. Those are great tools. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing, though, when you do return to it, how you remember how effective it is at it just neutralizing the world and having you see through a different set of eyes. Don, usually in the end of these podcasts, we like to pick up 2 or 3 pearls of wisdom or great learnings that may have come from your experience and pass those along. What would you share with our listeners that could be some really special lessons that you've learned that they could take advantage of even sooner than you did?
Well, as I was on my way over here this morning, I was thinking that, if I could try to live by one philosophy, it would be that I'm not the most important person in the organization. In fact, I'm probably the least important. I'm not delivering patient care on a daily basis. I'm not interacting with the medical community. I'm not counseling a family in, the tough times if they're losing a parent or something like that. And so if I'm able to support that cast of characters, that's really the nuts and bolts of our organization. I'm fulfilling my duty. If I'm not, then, who needs me? We don't need any more facilities. Our financing's in place. So I kind of think that I'm not so important. And that takes me to how I view almost every business. And that's as a 3-legged stool. And in that 3-legged stool, mine are my employees, my patients and their families, and then the medical community. And just imagine you're sitting on a 3-legged stool and one of the legs gives out. Well, you know what's going to happen. Hopefully you're not injured.
You fall over.
But you're going to hurt a little bit. And so it's my job to make sure that the knees on each of those legs is always strong. And so that's the way I believe. So if I were to tell that to somebody else, if they're in the manufacturing business, it's going to be a different 3 legs, but it's still going to be their customers, their employees, and something else. Maybe it's their quality control or something like that. I don't know. But I'm sure that they can come up with the 3 most important things. And one of the things that would never be a leg in my business would be profitability. I think profitability is a product of keeping those 3 legs intact.
Byproduct, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think that it's important for you to believe that you are the best at your business. And I think I differentiate that between how important you are to the business. I think you got to believe we're the best. And if we're not the best now, we're going to be the best, and we're going to figure out how to become the best. And I think that goes to passion. If you're not passionate about what you do, and if you don't enjoy it, maybe it's time to go further down the buffet line and look at something else.
I think that correlates to what you said earlier, David. That's really the key to playing to win.
Absolutely. I feel so selfish in this moment. And I feel selfish because I'm getting to sit across from the table for a true entrepreneur who's a visionary. And I'm walking away with what I feel is a basket full of golden nuggets today. Don, thank you so much for that. Really, I feel less selfish because we're recording this and hopefully somebody else is going to get this basket, but it's been a true pleasure for me today. Don, as always happy to have you next to me on this thing. So appreciate that.
Same here. And I'm kind of excited for those rebels out there that might be listening to this and get a chance to kind of trigger their potential and walk down the same exciting path that Don has.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll see you next time.